But right before 9/11, I was a lieutenant, and I had come off the line for what I thought was 6 months to work with the counseling unit right before I was getting promoted to captain, and that's when the trade center happened. We built our peer team out, starting with our retirees, because the active members were at the trade center. I thought I knew everything. I said, okay, I've been in New York for 5 years of this disaster, and I show up at Hurricane Katrina a few days after the hurricane and realize I knew nothing. I think we were taught, just to keep going, and that's not resilience.
Welcome to Respond to Resilience. Today we're going to be speaking with Frank Leto. He's retired captain and deputy director of the Counseling Service Unit, the CSU of FDNY. We're going to be doing a deep dive into how 9/11 led to the shaping of the FDNY Counseling Service Unit, and we'll also be talking about firefighter behavioral health. We invite you to like and subscribe: YouTube, Respond to Resilience; Facebook, Responder Wellness Inc., and Responder TV; LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. And please check out our website, respondertv.com, for past episodes and guest information.
This episode is made possible by the First Responder Center for Excellence. Discover more at firstrespondercenter.org and connect with us on X, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube.
We'll be right back to speak with Frank after this.
In this family, more of us die by our own hands than by the hazards of the job.
In this family, up to a quarter of 911 telecommunicators have symptoms of post-traumatic stress.
In this family, our mental health and wellness are in crisis,
while responders are quietly suffering.
In this family, many struggle with job-related stress,
burnout,
moral injury,
sleep disruptions, substance abuse,
and relationship problems.
In this family, we can help the helpers.
with vital information and resources,
resilient strategies,
and success stories of overcoming the obstacles.
In this family, no one is alone.
Welcome to Respond to Resilience with co-hosts retired Lieutenant David Dashinger, Dr. Stacy Raymond, and Bonnie Rumley, LCSW, EMTB.
We'd like to welcome Frank Leto. He's a retired FDNY captain. He's been the leader in fire service behavioral health since the 2001 attacks on the World Trade Center. He travels nationally and internationally, developing behavioral health protocols and aiding communities after major events. Mr. Leto is a member of the IAFF Disaster Response To-Go team, and he's worked closely with the NFFF, that's National Fallen Firefighters Foundation, and is a member of the FRCE, First Responder Centers for Excellence. He's on the Behavioral Health Advisory Council. Frank, warm welcome to Respond to Resilience.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's a real honor to be with all of you.
So Frank, I would like to start by asking you a question. I know that you were a fire officer at FDNY. Can you please tell us how you became involved with the Counseling Service Unit affiliated with FDNY?
Yeah, so that goes back quite some time. I came on the job a long time ago in 1983, but I believe it was 1986 or 1987. I'm sorry, I don't have the date, but a firefighter by the name of Jack Toomey died in the line of duty, and I was at that fire, and Jack was in the firehouse right next to us, and he was cutting the roof and died of a heart attack, and we're bringing him downstairs, and this fire that was fully involved doing CPR on the way downstairs. And we got back to the firehouse, and we felt bad, felt terrible for Jack and his family and his two kids. But there was nothing for us. And you felt guilty for asking for anything. So after that, and I really struggled after that event and many events that were going on. There was a fire department counseling unit at FDNY, but it was mostly based in for substance abuse. So I called the director at that time and asked if we can start working with firefighters, and that was really early on in the late 80s. So I became associated with them at that point, and would come offline for line of duty deaths and work with firefighters and their family, really not knowing what I was doing, but just being kind of being a shoulder to lean on. We kind of build a peer team from that. But right before 9/11, I was a lieutenant, and I had come off the line for 6 months, or what I thought was 6 months, to work with the counseling unit right before I was getting promoted to captain. And that's when the trade center happened.
Now, Frank, in reflecting back on 9/11, can you talk a little bit about how your response as a fire officer, how that and then the ensuing mental health crisis subsequent to 9/11 really shaped the counseling service's mission?
Yeah, sure. The day of the trade center, fortunately, I worked in Lower Manhattan. That's where the counseling unit was. And everyone that responded from that building, the office that I was, died that day. So I had a dentist appointment. And so I didn't go to work that day. But as soon as as soon as I saw it, I drove in and responded. But the second tower had fallen when I got to the towers with my team, and worked there that day. Probably as a firefighter, as frightened as I've ever been in my life. Really, shaking to my bones the whole day long. But on some level, felt an honor to be there. It felt like an honor to be there. I knew that every firefighter in the country, every firefighter in the world wanted to be where I was. Again, as terrible as it was, I knew I was where I belonged. So subsequently, we, that day, as it went on, we realized the scope of the disaster. Not only that we had lost thousands of civilians, but we had lost, it turns out 343, but we didn't know the exact number at that day. That we were working at the trade center. I was pulled out around 2 a.m. Because they were setting up a hotline for families of the first responders, and they wanted me to set up a hotline in this place called Fort Totten. So they took me to Fort Totten again in my bunker gear, and as I got to Fort Totten, they were stringing phone lines to this. And back then, the cell service wasn't really a thing. It was just starting to be a thing. And they were stringing phone lines into this building. And they said, what we're going to do is we're going to set up a phone bank, and families are going to call this number if they haven't heard from their firefighter son or husband. Mm-hmm. And so I called people from retired guys in. We had set up we were all ready to go, and we had a temporary list of firefighters. We didn't know who was under the buildings, mm-hmm. And I told them we were ready. And as soon as that happened, they started stringing the number for families to call, and the phones just lit up. Mm. And then we had the list, and if a wife had called, or a fiance or mom, and saying, I haven't heard from my son, we would look on the list and let them know that their son was officially on the list. Or if not, if they weren't officially on the list, we would get back to headquarters and say, we just got a call from, so-and-so's wife. They haven't heard from them. So part of the list was built that day from these phone calls. And it was probably, just being at the trade center, it was probably the worst I've ever felt in my life. And watching the men, it was all men at the time, answering the phones, crying like babies because they had relationships with the people that were killed, and were talking to family members. So that was my experience that day before I went. After that was set up and it was rolling, I went back to the Trade Center.
This is First Responder Center for Excellence Managing Director Frank Leto, inviting you to Music City, Nashville, where a critical conversation awaits. Join us for the Fire Service Mental Wellness and Suicide Prevention Symposium, March 20th and 21st, 2025, at the Renaissance Nashville Hotel. Don't miss our opening reception on March 19th at the Country Music Hall of Fame, a great way to network and kick off the event. Prepare for tomorrow with tools you can use today. We've lined up an incredible group of speakers, including Thomas Joyner and Dr. Sally Spencer Thomas, as they share the roadmap to support our brothers and sisters on the front lines. Let's make mental wellness a priority and learn effective, evidence-based strategies from the best in the field. Let's come together and tackle the critical issue of suicide and public safety. Your journey towards better mental health starts in Nashville. Spots are limited, so be sure to reserve your place now at firstrespondercenter.org/events.
Frank, can you kind of give us a picture of where the CSU was, and you just described, just the rapid kind of ramping up with the phones and the accountability piece. In terms of the counseling unit itself, like where was it before 9/11, and then what was the expansion like? How did you deal with the challenges of expanding so quickly to deal with the aftermath of 9/11?
So I think the FDNY CSU was probably the most progressive counseling service unit in the country when it came to firefighters' mental health. But we were a small unit, one location, about 12 people working there. The director was Malachi Corrigan, who was really a progressive thinker, a civilian and progressive thinker. So it was one location. A lot of substance abuse, which was the focus. There was so much stigma around mental health and PTSD, depression back then, still is to some sense. So when it became apparent the scope of the tragedy, now we had 343 firefighters that were killed. The grief that went throughout the department was unbearable. The trauma that was still going on was really remarkable. We had 600 kids that had lost their dads. It's just, even saying these things today, it's really even hard for me to grasp the gravity of what happened. And we knew immediately that we needed to make some tremendous changes. And in short order, we expanded to 6 different locations. We had 3 or 4 clinical people to start with, and we went to 20 or 30 clinical support. In those different locations, we built our peer team out, starting with our retirees, because the active members were at the Trade Center. Mm-hmm. We threw so much stuff at the wall. Many of it didn't work, and I think those are the lessons learned that departments that go through these tragedies should hear. And some stuff worked, and we can we built on that. Mm-hmm. But we tried a lot of different things.
So what had to be done to increase the buy-in, to peer support or using the services for the counseling center, since there was such a stronger stigma back then? Yeah. So again, I think what we came to realize, and it took us a while,
to realize it, but it was really sitting right in front of us, is that the magic was us, that the buy-in was going to come through people that had the same lived experience, that had credibility within the department, and that if they needed that extra level of care, that we had to find culturally competent clinical support and other resources. So it was really, sitting right in front of our faces, and it took us a while to realize that. One of the projects that I was in charge of, and we thought, okay, we have funding coming in. Let's see if we can get clinical support into the firehouses. We had 62 firehouses that had lost at least one member, and some, many, 10 and 12 members. So we interviewed dozens of clinicians and, in psychologists and many of them from NYU and that group. And we vetted them and assigned them to the firehouses and said, go there 10 hours a week. And now we had funding, we could pay them. Go there 10 hours a week, don't do therapy, but just let them become familiar with clinical, what a clinical support looks like or what a clinician does, answer their questions. And the program was basically a failure. And what we had to do, to my amazement, I understand it. We had to start doing support groups for the clinicians. And so at first I'm like, okay, this is ridiculous. And it wasn't, because they were not used to the level of grief and trauma that we were. And we were experiencing regularly, and not just from the trade center, where for a pediatric call or whatever, we'd get back to the station and have these conversations. Right. And now they became privy to our world. And so there were some clinicians in this group. I don't want to just blanketly say that they all were not, it all didn't work. There was 2 or 3 that really did a good job, and we kind of brought them in and said, what do you got? What is it that's working with you? One of them, son, she was a little Hispanic woman. She worked in the prison system, and her son went on to write Hamilton, believe it or not. But she was tough as nails. So we realized there that wasn't going to be the answer, that the first line of defense had to be us. So we had to educate members of the department that had a passion for this, and keep educating them and get them to knock on doors of the stations and spread the word. As that happened, and as more people came in to get help, they would spread it through the department, and it didn't happen overnight. It didn't. It took years to reduce and lift the stigma, but it did happen.
As firefighters and first responders, we're brilliant at the basics. We master the art of stretching the line, and we excel at being there for those who need us most. Yet even the best of us can be caught off guard. We sometimes face unexpected challenges like injury, cancer, or post-traumatic stress symptoms. But you're not alone. The First Responder Center for Excellence is here to equip you with the tools and resources you need to stay informed and prepared. We help you focus on staying strong, safe, fit, and resilient. Optimize your performance with cutting-edge health, wellness, and science information, from fitness to nutrition, medical evaluations to behavioral health, cancer awareness to cardiac health. We've got you covered. Remember, we're stronger together. Discover more at firstrespondercenter.org and connect with us on X, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube. The First Responder Center for Excellence. Equip yourself with excellence for every call.
Now, what advice, Frank, do you have for someone listening who's trying to get a peer support program or a behavioral health program going in their department or agency? What advice do you have for those people listening?
Patience really is probably the first one. Really try to get leadership buy-in. Try to get union or their local buy-in. It's really helpful to have that. If you have a chief that has understanding of behavioral health, that's great. If not, try to get an audience with him or her with a short, elevator pitch, because they don't have a lot of time. Just letting them know that this is going to make this department so much better. And then find your champions in the department, and those champions typically have had their own struggles and have come through it. And so I would say be patient. I would say be proactive. Don't wait for something to happen. It's been my experience, Bonnie, when you build these programs after something happens, they typically don't sustain. So, if you start now and take baby steps in building building your program, that's usually the most effective.
Frank, I'm going to ask you to shift gears and maybe shift hats to your IAFF hat and talk about when you're first showing up, arriving on the scene of a disaster as a behavioral health coordinator. What are your first steps? What do you set out to do, and what do you need to do initially to establish support for the first responders on scene?
I mean, I go back to the first time I did this, and so I was running or the deputy director of the program in New York for 5 years when Hurricane Katrina happened. And I think about myself back then and what I didn't know, but I thought I knew a lot. I thought I knew everything. I said, okay, I've been in New York for 5 years of this disaster, and I show up at Hurricane Katrina a few days after the hurricane and realize I knew nothing, that this was a completely different event. This is a completely different culture. And from there, when I respond, I understand that that I am a guest in this community. I try to fill any practical need that they need. I don't tell them what they need. I ask them what they need. I give them some suggestions, kind of a Chinese menu of things that we can do. I understand that I'm there just for a moment, and that it's their task to carry on. So, I try to, if they want to, arm them with some information that may be helpful. I don't tell them what they're going to experience because I have no idea, but I can let them know what's happened in the past and other places. And I always am honored to be there. And the people that work with me, go there with the gratitude of being in a place that needs some support. And that's the way we operate. We don't go in as the expert. I always say the expert is here, but it's you, not us.
So, Frank, you have so many years that you've spent supporting others through unimaginable tragedies. How do you personally cope with the inevitable stress that you take on? Like, what do you do to help yourself, and what do you tell other people like yourself in the same role?
Yeah, I mean, I probably, it took me a couple of years after the Trade Center to get into therapy. I was preaching it and not doing it. But I knew I needed it, probably a year out. I was really good at work, but not so good at home. Wherever I was, I felt guilty about not being at the other place. I mean, I had 3 kids and a wife, and still, I still have the same wife, and our relationship is really good now. And my relationship with my kids is good. I just had a grandchild, my first grandchild. But I always felt tremendous guilt wherever I was. If I was home, I felt like guilty I wasn't at work, and vice versa. And I spent, the hours at work. I can't even. I don't even know. I mean, my wife is a nurse, and I drove past her hospital. She's retired a couple of years, and I said, we were talking about how much she worked, and I said, I must have spent 60 hours a week. And she's like, Frank, you spent 90 hours a week, and when you weren't there, you were on the phone, and you were, and I was like emotionally absent for many years. I felt like I was in a play when I was at home, and I was just acting out what a dad and what a husband should do, because my mind was somewhere else. So therapy helped me there, and just, I think, maturity helped me, learning about boundaries, and I think there is a silver lining to this, having, there is growth in tragedy as well. So it did take years, but today I think I'm there. If that answers the question, I don't know.
It does, and I want to thank you for being so vulnerable and candid about your own story, because it helps our viewers and it helps our listeners, because I know a lot of them feel similarly, that guilt, the torn feeling, especially when you're leading anything in the first responder world, that feeling seems to always be there.
I think you have to listen to your body. I mean, I think we were taught, just to keep going, and that's not resilience. You have to understand where to stop, because if you keep going past that breaking point, you're just going to, over time, you're just going to wear out.
Right.
So you have to listen to your body. You have to listen to your emotions. You have to look at your behaviors. What are you doing? If you're not sleeping, you're not eating right. I think I learned to do that. It took years, and but I think I'm there now.
Good. Well, I'd love to ask you, do you have a success story or just a situation that comes to mind with all of the work that was done there that just hits you in this moment that you'd like to share?
So I think there are so many of those success stories. I mean, we mentioned it before, but the peer support, watching that grow, watching it evolve from just men and women leaning on each other, to actually building a program where we had resources and we can direct people to their needs. And it wasn't, it doesn't take a trade center. You don't need a major disaster like that. Every day in a fire station, 10 or 15% of the people that are working there are struggling. Mm-hmm. And it's personal struggles, it's relationship issues, it's their 16-year-old daughter that they're worried about. And watching the New York City Fire Department go from these men and women that were too tough to ask for any help to reaching out trusted members of the department reaching out and getting the help that they need. You know, I had heard data saying that the average individual after a trauma or a group of traumas, it will take 10 years before a PTSD diagnosis. So there's the trauma, and then it's 10 years in between, and then the diagnosis of PTSD, which is made by a clinician. And always thought about what happens during that 10 years. It's a gradual decline. We watch them, and we enable them in FDNY, in every department. We watch them lose their family. We watch them drink more. We watch them, eat ridiculously. We watch them lose their health and eventually die of their diseases from PTSD. So watching it at FDNY, us being able to shorten that time, prevent it altogether, we knew that we were not only affecting that individual and making their quality of life better, but their family and generations later. Mm-hmm. And just lifting that stigma, having proper clinical support, we were changing lives. And as I move on and from this career, and I'm getting to that point in a few years, that's if anything I'm proud of, it's that.
Well, thank you for sharing that, and that really wraps up the kind of like the evolution or the arc of where you started with the CSU, and to see that it's gotten to that place today is pretty amazing, to say the least.
The modern fire officer. Communicate, motivate, and lead. As officers, we embrace a profound calling, a call to serve with unwavering dedication, to lead with courage, and mentor with heart. In our profession, we are asked to move heaven and hell. We need charismatic leaders with the emotional IQ to motivate their people to execute their training at the highest levels. Consider your crew family. Serve your family with dedication and lead by example to inspire them to support each other and achieve greatness together. The foundation of leadership rests on service, sacrifice, self-control, and humility. Never stop learning. From day one, every experience is a continuous journey. Celebrate this extraordinary journey with a commitment to your craft and the deep care you invest in your team. The station officer is where the rubber hits the road. You decide the level of service given. What kind of mark will you leave?
The Modern Fire Officer. Communicate, motivate, and lead. Available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and wherever books are sold. Digital, print, and audio format.
Just take us through a little bit of what you're up to these days with the NFFF and FRCE. Anything you want to touch on with that, events coming up, any kind of special projects?
Sure. I mean, there's a group that I'm working with, Responder Strong, and I'll get to FRC and NFFF and the IAFF as well. But Responder Strong with Sarah Jenke, who's a close friend and a researcher. Mm-hmm. And what I've recognized in responding to the events that I have responded to over the years is that we are doing a much better job with fire service at these events and after these major events. But almost always there are people that are not being served. And for instance, at the Lahaina fire, which was about 18 months ago, we were there working with Maui Fire and the USAR teams, but there were heavy machinery operators from the community that were lifting these buildings off of their neighbors. Mm-hmm. And they did not have any education nor were getting any support. the emergency room nurses, the electric line people that were stringing electric lines back into their community, that were getting the wrath of the community because the electric companies were, being blamed for the fire. And meanwhile, these people, it was their community. They were stringing lines, seeing this devastation. I think of teachers that are in these active shooting situations. I think of teachers that are doing drills with first graders, lining them up, even if there's not an active shooting, and watching these kids hide into their desk or go into the hallways or whatever, and the trauma that brings on. Recently working with the EPA about, the Environmental Protection Agency responding to disasters all over the country, and there for months. Oil spill, people that are responding to oil spills as well. I think we have to expand what we think of as first responders, and think about all the people that are responding to events in our changing world. One of the first exposures I had to this was there was a theater shooting in Aurora, Colorado many years ago. And I went there as the behavioral health coordinator for the IAFF. And we were there working with fire and police and EMS. And I asked if somebody had mentioned dispatch and what they had to go through with getting calls from the civilians in the theater. So one afternoon or late evening after we worked with fire, I said, let's go. I went with my team, a couple clinicians from New York, and I said, let's go visit the dispatch. And we walked into the office of the dispatch, and men and women just started to cry because no one ever thought of them. And they were crying and we didn't do anything. We just showed up.
Wow.
And I started to recognize that, it's great to work with the fire service, but this is, one big world and one big community when it comes to first responders that we really need to think about everyone that's on the scene.
Mm-hmm. And that's something that we've touched on before, and you really drive home the point that we don't even consider some of the people that are responding to emergencies, and some of them on a regular basis, tow truck operators. We're seeing a lot of the same stuff we're seeing at MVAs. I'm sure they don't have CISD and access to peer support and things like that. So yeah, it's such an underserved community. Can you just share with us a little bit about your ongoing work, FRCE and
Sure.
FFF, and any cool projects or events?
Yeah. So I don't know if they're cool, but it's yeah. We just built out, and I just sent it all over to Frank. I hope he accepts it. But we were looking at stress first aid, which is a model that was built from the military, had been converted to the fire service, and Patricia Watson and Vicki Taylor are very prominent in that. And I thought that we needed to kind of advance stress first aid and see where it fits in a department. So, and how to make it sustainable in a behavioral health program. So, been working on the last couple of months on building a program for that, and just delivered that to the FRCE. So I'm excited to see that work. I continue to work on the Go team with the IAFF. Fortunately, this year we had one major disaster. It's been with North Carolina, and which is terrible, and Florida hurricane, but that's been a very active part of my life. and that seems to just be getting worse and worse this year. It's just awful what happened in North Carolina. Mm-hmm. Again, working with Responder Strong to expand out the support that we have in the community. So that's really what I'll be focusing on over the next year. Is trying to. I don't want what we've learned to kind of just dissipate. So I'd like to let people know the lessons learned from the major disasters and from New York and from my experience. So that's kind of what my plan is over the next couple of years. There's a new generation, which is great, and where I just wanted to part that information to them so they can hit the ground running.
That's incredible. An amazing body of work, and we salute you for all that you're doing and continue to do. Frank, where can people get in touch with you or find you on social media, internet, anything like that?
Well, I'm not so good at that, but they can always email me. I try my best. I've learned to try my best to stay away from social media. It's just healthier for me, particularly. And I would mention that to people that are in communities that are that experience a disaster. The rumor mill and the things that you see on social media can really be hurtful. Mm-hmm. Yes. I just got back from a meeting with Maui Fire, and the healthiest ones there said that they stayed off of social media. They and the ones that were glued to social media, hearing the rumors of who's going to get fired and they did the wrong thing and they did this, they did that, really had a lot of sleepless nights and worse. Yeah. So, hey, listen, we can't turn the clock back, and this is the world that we live in, but yeah. I would say really be careful with that. I know that's not the question you asked, but it came up, and I think it's important. But my email, hopefully, that to them.
Well, Frank, I want to thank you on behalf of our profession for everything you've done for New York and beyond. We're all on the same page with our missions, and thank you as a fellow brother, first responder, for tending to your people and your family. You've done great work, and I hope when that day comes to retire, you can hold your head super high knowing you did everything you could.
Well, I appreciate that so much, Bonnie. And like I said to start with it, it's been an absolute honor. I can't express the gratitude I have, and the trust that people have put in me.
And I just want to say, Frank, I think you're a fountain of good advice. You've been through a lot of learning experiences, and it's great that you're so willing and passionate about passing on. This is what works, and this is, I've seen this. I've seen what doesn't work, and I see what does work. So, and I really appreciate your passion to help other people. It doesn't matter where they are, and I admire that.
Well, thank you very much, Stacy.
Well, I can say as I'm looking forward to seeing you in person in March in Nashville, and I want to thank you for being here with us today and kind of giving us the scope of all this that you've been involved with and continue to move forward in our profession, especially as it pertains to the next generation. I think that's super important to share with them your knowledge and expertise. So, thank you for being with us, and look forward to our next conversation.
Thank you.
Remember to like and subscribe YouTube, Responder Resilience, Facebook, Responder Wellness Inc., and Responder TV, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and go to our website, respondertv.com, for past episodes and guest information. Till the next time, stay safe, be kind to yourself. Take care.